What's up guys, welcome to a new episode of Filmmaking Friday. Today we're going to talk all about frame rates. Filmmaking Friday. Welcome back to the series. Today we're going to dive into the world of frame rates and how they impact our films. Frame rate is an essential aspect of filmmaking as it determines how smoothly motion is captured and displayed. Frame rate refers to the number of individual frames or images that are displayed per second in a video. The standard frame rate in filmmaking is 24 FPS, which stands for frames per second, FPS. This means that 24 unique images are shown in 1 second of footage, creating the illusion of motion. This frame rate has been the industry standard for decades and is widely used in narrative films, documentaries and television shows. It provides a cinematic look that we're all familiar with. However, there are other frame rates you should be aware of. One thing I'm just going to quickly mention is 25 FPS. 25 FPS is basically 24 FPS, but it's the industry standard in Europe, 24 in the States, 25 for example in Germany. That got me into a lot of discussions over here because I also always shoot in 24 FPS because it's how it should be. It has to do something with the electric circuits here in Europe, I think, like the Hertz thing. Don't ask me. Another common frame rate is 30 FPS, which is commonly used in television broadcasts and live events. The higher frame rate results in smoother motion, but it can sometimes look a little bit more like video and not like film. It's basically a bit more reality TV and less cinematic. Then there's high frame rates, HFR, like 48 FPS, 60 FPS or even higher. HFR has gained popularity especially in action-packed films as it can enhance the sense of realism. The most noticeable example of high frame rate is probably James Cameron's Avatar. James Cameron, the visionary filmmaker behind the groundbreaking film Avatar, made a bold decision to shoot the film in 48 frames per second, which is basically just double the industry standard rate of 24 FPS. He decided to do this to push the boundaries of cinematic immersion to create a truly captivating visual experience for the audience. The choice of 48 FPS allowed Cameron to capture a high level of detail and realism in every frame. By doubling the frame rate, Avatar presented smoother motion and reduced motion blur, resulting in a heightened sense of clarity and fluidity in the on-screen action. Now enough of Avatar, let's get back to 60 FPS. 60 FPS can not only be used to capture HFR video, which is also supported by YouTube since 2015, it's also very common to play back a 60 FPS clip in a 24 FPS timeline. Slow it down by 40% and you have slow motion, at least a little bit. This is of course the most common use of high frame rates. If you want even slower slow motion, you have to shoot at even higher frame rates. By shooting at higher frame rates such as 120, 240 or even higher FPS, 120 is just the most common one after 60, and then playing it back at the standard 24 FPS, you can achieve stunning slow motion effects that add drama and impact to your visuals, and that also allows you to see details the normal eye wouldn't be able to catch. The choice of frame rate depends on the aesthetic and mood you want to convey. If you're shooting a fast-paced action scene, a higher frame rate like 60 FPS might be suitable. On the other hand, if you're going for a classic cinematic look, 24 FPS is the way to go. Timelapse or hyperlapse footage is another area where frame rate plays a significant role. When capturing a timelapse, you typically shoot at a lower frame rate, like 1 or 2 FPS, to condense long periods of time into a shorter video. This creates a visually appealing effect, showing the passage of time in a compressed format. Of course, you can always shoot at 24 FPS and then speed it up in post, but the true way of doing it is just capturing a photo every now and then to create the time or hyperlapse, which is basically just a time-lapse with movement. Also then you can shoot at a lower camera shutter to introduce motion blur into your time-lapse, which you otherwise would have to do in post. If you want to know everything about the camera shutter, be sure to subscribe because that's the topic of the next episode of Filmmaking Friday. Frame rate is also very important in animation. Animators very often don't work with 24 but 12 or 15 FPS. It can vary depending on the desired style and the medium used. Higher frame rates may be used, as you should know by now, for smoother motion or to create a specific visual effect. You can also shoot in 12 FPS or shoot in 24 FPS and then use After Effects to turn your footage into, for example, 16 FPS to create a vintage 8mm film camera look. Speaking of that, it's also worth mentioning you can adjust frame rates in post-production through a process called frame interpolation. This technique involves creating new frames between existing frames to increase or also decrease the frame rate by taking out some frames. While it can be useful in certain situations to use optical flow to create a fake slow motion, it's of course always better to shoot in the according frame rate from the beginning if that's possible. Before wrapping up, let's quickly address some technical considerations. When shooting, ensure your camera settings are correctly set to the desired frame rate. Sometimes clients ask for a specific frame rate. I, for example, told you normally I shoot in 24 FPS, but here in Germany, if I, for example, shoot for an ad that runs in the cinema or for TV productions here in Germany, they have certain specifications which I have to take into consideration. For example, setting my camera from 24 to 25 FPS, so from NTSC to PAL, so that they can use my footage if they have the specifications. So if you're working for clients or other people, be sure to communicate the frame rate in advance. I always write it down on my production offer just to be sure. So to summarize, frame rate plays an important role in filmmaking, influencing the look and feel and overall visual quality of your footage. Whether you're aiming for a cinematic experience or a more realistic portrayal, understanding and choosing the right frame rate is essential. Now that's it for today's episode. I hope you found it informative and useful. As always, feel free to leave any questions down below in the comments, hit me up on Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on any future episodes. You can do that right here. Next Friday we're going to talk all about the camera shutter, so be sure to come back for that, or even sooner this Sunday for a new main video on the channel. Until then, goodbye.